All right. Good morning to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning also to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to this exclusive edition of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, also co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. And this morning we do have a treat for you guys as we're going to get a head start on Farpoint Con that is happening next weekend. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the convention, let me bring you up to speed and then we will introduce today's guests. Organized by Farpoint Foundation, Farpoint Con is an annual gathering for fans of all genres of imaginative fiction, whether it's science fiction, fantasy, horror, superheroes, etc., and all the media formats in which they might appear: cinematic movies, television, podcasts, web video, you name it. They make a mission to celebrate it. Their mission is to bring fans together to learn from and support each other in their genre interests. Now, with that, I want to introduce our guest today. Today's guest is an award-winning writer and executive producer of many popular animated series, whether it is Transformers, Robots in Disguise, Transformers Rescue Bots, Transformers Prime, G.I. Joe, Renegade, Jackie Chan Adventures, Men in Black, the series. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay. Roughnecks, the Starship Troopers, Chronicles, Max Steel, and Jumanji, just to name a few. If that weren't impressive enough, he has segued that experience into founding Darby Pop Publishing back in 2013. It is my pleasure to welcome onto the show Jeff Kline. Jeff, good morning. I think you're muted, sir. Let me unmute you. Go ahead.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. So, first and foremost, thanks for joining us this morning. And as I said, it's cool to be able to get a head start on Farpoint Con, just to get the ground running. From what I understand, this passion to be able to do storytelling started from a young age. Am I correct on that?
You are, Brandon. I was very lucky. I was one of those kids, or you can decide if I was lucky, but I was one of those kids who had a pretty good idea of what they wanted to do from a pretty young age. So I had the Super 8 camera when I was a little kid making movies with my friends, and then graduated to a video camera back when you had to carry a video machine on your back, basically, if you wanted to shoot on video.
Oh my gosh.
JVC had a two-piece one where you could just take the record and playback part and not the guts. And I ended up becoming a newspaper reporter, and then moved to Los Angeles and spent a little bit more than 20 years out there. Worked for a little while in features, and then segued to television, both live action, primetime, and ultimately animation, where I seem to have had most of my success. So this was storytelling was something apparently I always did, and had a pretty good idea that I wanted to do professionally.
Excellent. And, to dive deeper into, that portion of your career, I understand that there, just by, I guess you can say, trial and error of how different mediums work, you made the decision, I understand, of making that focus more so in the television than it was in film, based on kind of the, I guess you could say, the turnaround time when we're talking about in terms of those mediums. Right. So can you share more details about that and
Absolutely.
That transition?
Absolutely. And by the way, I appreciate that you did a little bit of a deep dive. You did some research.
Try to,
nice.
Sir. Yes.
Nice. So I grew up on the East Coast. I was born in Boston. I went to an East Coast school. So my knowledge of the film business, or the entertainment business, was not great. So when I moved to Los Angeles, movies are sort of, I think, what everybody initially thinks of who wants to work out there. And the part of the business I kind of understood from my days as a newspaper reporter, and then an entertainment reporter, and then also doing a little bit of writing for some movie magazines, I kind of understood the low budget movie business. So that's like Roger Corman and Charlie Band.
Yes, of course. Wow. Now you're getting deep cut on me now, but okay. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So, they were still doing 20 plus movies a year, each of them. So my first unpaid gig in LA was working for Roger. And then I was reading scripts and doing coverage for Full Moon, Charlie Band, Empire, actually, at the time. And that was fine, because it didn't pay very much, but it was constant churn. And then I got my first kind of legitimate job in features as a low-level assistant / development executive working for a couple of producers, Michael Schamberg and Harold Ramis. And what I discovered in that job was people make movies like every 5 years when they feel like it. It's just, and I was so used to, first from the newspaper world, like having a 6 o'clock deadline. If you didn't get your stuff in by the end of the day, you weren't going in the next morning's paper. And then with Charlie and Roger, at least you start working on it, maybe in January, and by March they were shooting. So the delay in features was making me a little crazy. And then the writer's strike hit. So I eventually got laid off. And some friends I had made along the way were like, if you want a deadline, TV is probably a better bet for you. So I ended up getting into NBC's executive training program, which was called the Associates Program. I got placed in daytime, which was perfect because it was 5 shows a week, wow. 40 or more weeks a year, and multiple shows, and discovered I liked the deadlines of television, and the immediacy of it. Much like with a newspaper, you write an article, it runs the next morning, people are bitching about it by 2 hours later or whatever. And in TV, you get some pretty immediate feedback too. Much more so than with features, it's done. The movie's done. Maybe what people have to say will impact the sequel if there is one. But in TV, you can actually make adjustments as you go from episode to episode, depending on what the audience is responding to. And ultimately, I found that I really like that.
Excellent. And I went down a smorgasbord of, if you will, of crazy IPs and properties there when we're talking about the animated series that you've worked on. And I have to ask, those are not small properties, those are not small IPs, and with that comes baggage of lore and all of that. So could you share that of working on any of those respective shows of the lore that you're dealing with, whether we're talking about Transformers or G.I. Joe or Men in Black, like Jumanji, there's a lot of lore that goes with that.
You're 100% right. And I think ultimately, if you have success in one thing in entertainment, people tend to come back to you to do it again and again. So Jumanji was my first animated series, and there was nowhere near as much lore as there was for Transformers, which had been 40 years or whatever. But there's both lore, but there's also creatives who were involved in various ways, who were involved with the movie, who are still going to be involved in the series. So there's a lot of things to wrangle. And before I became a writer producer, I spent 5 years as an executive in television at Columbia, then Sony. So I'd had some experience trying to serve multiple masters. And since I was able to do in Jumanji, suddenly I became someone who they would call when they had a property with a lot of, as you say, baggage, both good and bad. Look, the good is I come into this all as a fan. So yes. I want to honor the past as much as everyone. But I also appreciate that you have to do something to update it. You have to try to bring in, or at least often you want to try to bring in new fans, right? So let's take Transformers Prime, which was the first Transformers series I did. That was coming off of, unbelievable success of a number of features, and not quite as much success on the animated side, but with people still loving the original. But I think the most recent series, which had been quite good, was Transformers Animated, and it had lasted, I think, a couple of years. But they were really looking to kind of re-energize the franchise in between the movies. And the truth is, the movies pretty violent. Not everybody wanted to take their kids necessarily to see Transformers. So Prime was a tough one because you had literally, I think I've mentioned this in other interviews, when Hasbro gave me the Bible for Transformers as a brand, it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, and not everything aligned. Like, there was lots of conflicting information. So the task was to try to sort of start over to some degree without throwing out all the stuff that had worked in all the various iterations, because there's stuff you can pull from each and every take on Transformers, including the Japanese only stuff. Bring new people into it, not alienate the people that have been around since the original. And look, and at the end of the day, all you can do is the best you can do, right? So I came into it not having grown up on the original. I wasn't. So in some ways, I think that's an advantage for me. Same thing with the G.I. Joe Renegade series. I didn't grow up. I was a little bit too old to grow up on the 80s G.I. Joe. So I'm the guy who hired a whole bunch of super fans, but then asked the questions that a novice would of like, well, why does he have to do that? Why does that character have to go there? Why can't this be a woman? Why can't? And often there was no real answer other than, well, that was the way
That's
they
just
did
the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, but and getting back to your original question, so there's all the lore and there's the fan base that you want to satisfy, but you also want to surprise, and you also want to, kind of push to the edge and see where they're willing to go with you. Then there's also the needs of a brand new network, the hub, right? Brand new network with a brand new agenda. The needs of the toy company, which are really the ones paying for the show. So they need to sell toys. So I need to be very aware of what they perceive their needs to be. But guess what? Sometimes what the toy company wants is not necessarily what makes the best TV series, right? So, and the best example I'll give you on that, and then I'll stop talking because I'm rambling.
No, you're good. You're good, man.
So we were in early stages. Jose Lopez was our lead designer on Transformers Prime, and he was doing character designs. And we were submitting them, and it was taking them very, very long to get back to us on the character designs. And we really needed a quicker turnaround. And they were very fast about almost everything else. They were great. Aaron Archer was our point person. But for whatever reason, and we're going back and forth, and they're just not seeming to approve things that we think are pretty simple. And why is this hanging them up? So I got together with Aaron over lunch. Literally, I traveled 3,000 miles to go to Rhode Island, and we sat down together. And what came out was when Hasbro sells Transformers toys, they put them in blister packs in their vehicle mode, right? So what the kids are seeing first is the vehicle mode often. We were sending the drawings, and what's much more important to us was the robot mode, was because that's the character, right? That's where the characteristics of the personalities are going to be demonstrated in the design. So it was literally as simple as us sending them the vehicles either simultaneously or previously, because they just couldn't wrap their heads around looking at the character first, even though that was, so we would still design the character first, but we wouldn't send it to them until we had the vehicle stuff figured out as well. And it's a tiny little example that had an ultimately happy ending, but those kinds of things come up over and over again. And even within, the toy company, there's going to be different points of view from different divisions on what they need and what they want. And so on something like Rescue Bots, which was geared toward a much younger audience, the idea was we want to try to bring young kids into this world with really simplified toys, and obviously a much younger skewing narrative, which is why there's no war in Rescue Bots. But, there would be various times where the toy division would say, hey, can you put a vehicle carrier? We want to try to sell that toy. And we'd be like, they're vehicles. Why would they need a vehicle carrier? It seems so, it's stuff like that. Ultimately, I feel like it's all about the people you put around you and the passion of, we were very fortunate the hub executives were equally passionate about all of it as we were, Donna Ebbs and Ted Harbert and others. Hasbro was a brand new studio, and Mike Vogel and Mike Ross, and they were, again, insanely passionate, mostly fans. So you had a lot of people trying to pull in the same direction, even when there were barriers put in the way, or at least, temporary roadblocks. That was a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I appreciate it. I appreciate your thorough answer. But in speaking is that you commented on the idea of whenever you're working on these shows, and especially shows that have lore such as these, that you have to find that balance of bringing in new audiences and bringing in the dedicated audiences that are already there, that are already established. Now, as someone who has a little idea of the inside baseball of it all behind the scenes when it comes to entertainment business and the different roles, if you will, as a writer, you don't always have a lot of say. As an actor, you may not always have a lot of say in the finished product. So as someone who not only, had that role as a writer, but also had it as a producer, did that provide you some additional license and some freedom to have have a handle on what that finished product would be and being able to determine. And can you talk about that? Because a lot of people don't really understand that in certain roles, even though, people glamorize a lot some of these roles, you don't, when it comes to the finished product, you don't really have a lot of say in terms of what the finished product is going to look like.
Absolutely. So ultimately, I have a lot of say,
Yeah.
for better or for worse, because that means
Yeah.
I also have
Yeah.
to take the blame.
Yeah.
Look, you know this as well as anyone. Success breeds a certain amount of independence or final word.
And trust.
And trust, yes, and absolutely trust. And I came into animation having worked exclusively in live action primetime for a number of years. And I didn't really know at the time that animation could work differently. So in live action in primetime, the showrunner, who's often the head writer, but the executive producer definitely, their word is sort of the final word.
Yes.
The network may have a lot of input and a very strong point of view, and ultimately they may get rid of that executive producer. But as long as the executive producer is there, they are kind of where the buck stops. So I came into animation just sort of assuming it was the same way and didn't really learn till later that often it wasn't, that often the toy company was the one who was driving decision making. But it was sort of too late. Like I had been, Jumanji was successful. Dragon Tales was very successful. So when people hired me from that point forward, they hired me knowing that my first priority was to protect the show. Like that's what everybody who's ever hired me, I've been very clear. It's like, I want to give you what you want, network. I want to give you what you want, toy company. I want to give you what you want, studio. But at the end of the day, I work for the show. And I'm going to do whatever I think is necessary to protect and make the best possible version of the show that I possibly can. And if that means I have to say no to you, network, or you, studio, or you, toy company, then I will, and I do. And it definitely makes things, my life would probably have been much easier if I had been more of a, I don't want to say get along guy, because I don't feel like I'm difficult, but I'm definitely, I have strong opinions.
Yes. But it's been slightly prickly at times.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, that's not just external, that's internal as well. As you've probably heard from other interviews, I'm tough on writers. I can be tough on, I have hopefully have a pretty clear vision of what I want. Not that it can't be shifted and changed depending on the best idea winning. And often that best idea comes from someone else. It usually comes from someone else, actually. But because I've been successful in the past, I was definitely given more runway than I think some other people have had historically. And, it's really hard to tell someone who has only worked a certain way, oh, no, you need to work differently this time, if the way they've worked
has been
money
successful
for other people. Yeah, it's made money for you. So let me do it.
For sure. So switching gears here and transitioning into publishing, as I mentioned in the introduction, that you founded Darby Pop back in 2013. So in mentioning that, am I right to assume that there wasn't, even though you had, as we just mentioned, the prior experience in television and in animation, that there wasn't as much there with comics to start?
Yeah, other than the fact that I had developed, both as an executive and then as a writer-producer, I developed some comic book properties over the years.
Sure. So can you talk a bit about that daunting kind of transition? Because I guess it came as a result of a life change for yourself in trying to do that. So
you're you're good. Yes, you're 100% right. So Darby is named after my daughter, Darby Kline. Darby Pop, is named after my daughter. And in 2007, she was turning 5. And we decided that we wanted to raise her back on the East Coast. My wife and I. My wife is also from the East Coast originally. So we moved to southern Maine. And I still worked in Los Angeles. And actually about 6 months after the move, that's when Hasbro and Kurtzman and Orsi asked me to do Transformers, the first one, Transformers Prime, which I thought would be maybe just a few month gig to set up an animation studio for them and get the show running, and became a 6 or more year gig. Because of the multiple Transformers series and G.I. Joe. So we moved to Maine, and then 6 months later, I basically abandoned my wife and daughter and was going to Los Angeles for 3 out of every 4 weeks of the month, basically, which was crazy. When that was finally coming to an end, when my wife said, Darby's getting to be middle school age, if anything is going to happen with her regarding food issues or, body image or bullying or whatever typically happens around these years, it'd be great if you could be home. So that seemed fair. I was happy to do that. But I was going to miss sort of the daily interactions with all my artists and stuff. I liked being in rooms with them. I liked having a reason to talk to them all the time. And that's really where the comic book thing came from. A lot of them had worked in, a lot of the artists who work in animation obviously also work in comics. A lot of the writers who work in animation also work in comics. So my initial thought was, I'll do one book. It's based on an idea I have that I've always wanted to do. I'll get some of my friends to work on it, and that'll be it. And the problem is that when you mention to people in LA that you are going to publish something, especially a comic book, all these writer friends of yours talk about the idea they've always wanted to do for comics, and your artist friends talk about the idea they always wanted to do for comics, and suddenly you're a publishing company and not just self-publishing one title. So that's what happened. We launched with the equivalent of 5 titles, all of whom were written either by myself or other writer friends in the TV business like Eric Garcia and Fetterman and Skya. And I suddenly had to figure out, well, how do you do this? So ultimately, I became the first, or Darby Pop became the first creator-owned sub-label of IDW, because I had no idea how to distribute comic books, or the physical stuff behind the printing of them, or the warehousing. Sure. So that was incredibly helpful. I basically rented their pipeline. Then we went with a company called Magnetic, and we've been independent for the last 7 or 8 years or so. But the desire to do it grew out of a continued love for storytelling, but really even more so a desire to just keep playing with my friends in Los Angeles.
For sure. And speaking to making that transition, getting an idea, you never forget your first, in terms of that first project. Talk to me about that first, that first comic, from what I understand. What is it? Indestructible, right?
Yep.
So can you talk a bit about now having officially that first, that first work that you're doing with Darby?
Yes. So, it's pretty satisfying. I think that's sort of, look, I don't know how much of a false narrative anyone's supposed to. Comic books is not a great business. It's really hard to make a living as an artist or a writer. It's even harder as a publisher. It's a terrible business. It's very small. Having said all that, it can be incredibly satisfying creatively, especially when over the years you've worked in an arena where there are lots and lots of chefs, right? For better and for worse. There's lots and lots of chefs. When you're doing a comic book, especially if you're an artist writer, I cannot draw at all. You can basically be your own boss. You can be everything if you want to be. And in my case with Indestructible, I was interfacing with an artist or two and a colorist and, maybe a letterer and a designer. And that was about it. So it felt really contained and really easy as far as navigating, shared input and stuff like that. And then the end product, again, comes relatively quickly and gets out there relatively quickly, and you get feedback relatively quickly. And this is even before the true explosion of the internet, where now you can get the feedback instantaneously. So again, having come from briefly this idea of like, geez, it takes 5 years to make a movie, to we make a show and it takes about 6 months until it hits air, or 3 months until episodes hit air and you start to hear back, to animation, which again can take like for a year or more from the time you start the show until it actually hits air. And you often have done all your episodes, or a lot of them, before you even begin airing. To this, you publish an issue every month for the first few months, and it's pretty instantaneous. That's a pretty amazing, and if it's working, satisfying situation. So again, for me, on the creative side, comic books have been wonderful, and I've been able to, again, work with a lot of friends and give some people their start. A lot of people there. We used to run a contest called Breaking Into Comics, and a number of writers and artists got their very first published work as a result of that contest, because we'd publish either special issues or special editions of some of our trades with additional material. So that's all great, but I do not want to mislead anybody. It is a hard business. I would never been able to just do comics. So I have always maintained a hand in the TV business. In some ways, COVID helped my career because suddenly the thing I had been saying for years that I don't have to be in Los Angeles came true, and suddenly I didn't have to be in Los Angeles as much. So, since then, almost everything I do is online, even though I prefer, nothing makes me happier than having a room full of 100 artists and writers and colorists and designers and, and just the people crossing into each other's desks or offices and sharing information. Honest to God, the best time of my life was I've got G.I. Joe Renegades on one part of the floor, and I've got Transformers Prime on another part, and I've got the writing staff for Rescue Bots downstairs in this office building in Burbank. And as was intended and as did happen, when something happened and Transformers fell on its face because of either a technology issue or something, G.I. Joe would rush over and help. And then, sometimes I'd come back from lunch and they'd be having a Nerf war because it was Hasbro, of course. I loved that. I loved when we were all in the same place. It will never be that again in my business. Even I only ever recorded, other than Dragon Tales, with all my actors in a room simultaneously.
Yeah, that's
almost impossible
thing now. Yeah,
yep.
Now post-COVID. Yeah,
and that I will miss, and I do miss that tremendously because I feel like you get the best stuff when everybody's actually in a room working off each other, bouncing off each other.
Yeah, for sure.
But you can't argue with the reality that if people have to drive because of traffic an hour or more to get to the office, it's not fair to ask them to come in when all you need to do is draw, and they can draw from home. Anyway, so the business has changed. The animation business has changed dramatically over the past few years. It's only going to change more with AI, especially, and not in a positive way. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yes.
But anyway, like I said, I'm rambling again, so I'll stop there. But,
no, you're good. So, in closing, one of the things that I like to dive into, and I mean, you shared, as you mentioned, you've been very thorough, and I appreciate it of sharing the ins and outs of everything, and just summing it up for someone who is trying to do either, whether it's from what you've learned in becoming having a publishing company versus even being in that in the film and television realm as a writer or as a producer. What would be the advice that you would give them? Because these days I feel like 10 years ago was far different. The landscape looks far different now than it does 10 years ago. I mean, you were just talking about comics where we have things digitally, we have things that, physical media, and then even with film and TV, like, don't get me started. We could spend a lot of time on that, whether it's going to theaters or streaming now. So, the landscape looks so much different than even it did maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There used to be a much clearer pathway that I could kind of talk people through.
Well, sure.
Depending on what part of if they wanted to be a writer, these are the things. If you wanted to be an artist, if you wanted to be an executive, it is much less clear now. And you are much more responsible for wearing more hats. So if you're an artist now, there used to be, or let's say a writer, so you're a novelist even, if you were lucky enough to get an agent and then get a deal, the publisher would take a lot of the responsibility after that off your plate. Your real job was to write and occasionally do some promotional stuff. Now you have to be your own publicist. You probably have to be your own, maybe even your own publisher, your own distributor. You got to do it all yourself. In some ways, I look at that only because of what I came out of and say that's the bad news. The good news is the barrier to entry is so much lower than it used to be in every part of the business. So if you wanted to work in comic books in any capacity 20 or 30 years ago, you had to, in most cases, kind of work through a system that existed, right?
Yeah.
Now you literally can do everything yourself. And it's not unusual. And there are systems in place to actually assist you with that.
Crowdfunding, now
exactly.
It's crazy. It's crowdfunding.
And then you do all you sell online and you do all your own publicity and marketing. And again, it's a lot to do. And in some ways it's more challenging. I feel like if your goal was to really just be a true creative, but nobody can say no. Even the idea of making television, well, this whole concept of vertical television really showed up. It's like you shoot them on your phone. 20, 30 years ago. What? Like that never, you had to kind of get into the system that existed in order to have any sort of broader success, right? And all that is gone, and the rules are changing constantly and will continue to. So in some ways, it's a great time to want to pursue something creative. I would say the takeaway is it's a great time to pursue something creative from a technological standpoint and from an access standpoint. It's a horrible time to pursue something creative from a financial standpoint, because it is not clear how you monetize so much of what is going on now. You could make your own book. Can you make a living from that book? That's a very different, so that's, in some ways, that's why there are still the old guard, because it's the part of the business that still sort of has,
reliable.
Yeah. Although less so than it used to be. I remember, especially when I started in television, shows would get canceled with 27 million viewers a week. That was considered, well, it's good, but not great. Now you have 400,000 or 500,000 on a network, and it gets renewed. So
I was going to say, I'm going to age myself. I remember when there were separate unions, Jeff, separate television and film union. So,
yes.
But yeah.
But here's the advice, because I kind of talked about it. So if you want to be a writer, you need to write, right? So on occasion I've taught, I do a lot of seminars and things. If you raise your hand and say you're a writer, and I ask you what you're working on, and you say nothing, then at that moment, you're not a writer. Like, you should be writing all the time, whatever that means to you. It could be journaling. It doesn't matter, whatever it means to you. If you want to be an artist, you should be drawing all the time. And you should be learning more about the other parts that are connected to what you do. So, for example, if you're an artist who wants to work in animation and you want to draw storyboards, if you haven't taken a film class, if you don't understand film language, take a film class. You can do them all online now. You don't need to go to film school, but it was important to me when I was hiring artists, they knew where to put a camera and why you would use a close-up versus a two-shot versus a wide versus a reverse. And if you don't speak that language, you're at a disadvantage when you're trying to work with people who, a director of your episode does speak in film language. And same thing, understand, like, if you've never taken an acting class or an improv class, take one. Like, to understand sort of that point of view is really useful. And this is true, for writers as well. The more, unless you truly want to live on your own island, or unless you do this all already yourself, the more you understand about the other parts of what goes into making what you want to ultimately make and get out there,
far more employable.
Far more employable, and you'll be happier with the end product because you'll understand, like, you have a much better sense of why decisions got made. Again, it goes back to that where we started with that Hasbro conversation about Transformers toys being on the blister pack in the vehicle mode. Until I dove deep to understand the toy company's point of view, it never would have dawned on us, because that would never have been on our radar. Like, why? TV movies tend to be character first. It's all about the characters. So anyway, my advice is do what you're doing. Do it as constantly as you can. Obviously, you work a different job full time. You come home tired. There's always sentiment, but as much as you can. And because now it's so much easier to do so, dig into some of the related aspects, the related creative aspects to the thing you want to do. Because the more you know, the more you can talk to people in their language that do what they do, the better for everybody and the better the product.
Well said. Well said. So Jeff, as I mentioned at the top, we have Farpoint Con happening next weekend. Can you tell folks where they can, find you in the meantime before next weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. So before next weekend, you can find us at darbypop.com, DARBYPOP.com. We have our store, sells all our comic books. You get a little bit of background on everything, darbypop.com. I have never done this convention before, so I'm actually really excited about it. It seems like it's going to be great. And Darby Pop will be in the main vendors area, the main ballroom, and we'll be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So again, first time for me to do this. I sign everything for free. So if you have bought DVDs in the past or books of ours or whatever, and you want me to sign them, just bring them. I'm happy to do that. But obviously we will have our full line of books, and I'll have the few DVDs I still have been able to scrounge up to sell there. So, and more than anything, I just like talking to people. It's a way for me, as much as anything, to sort of, talk to, chat with, meet a fan base that I only ever knew online, basically. It's really, I'm old enough to still like in-person stuff. So.
Cool. Awesome. Well, there you guys have it. Again, I want to thank Jeff Kline for, coming on board with us. I'm your host, Brandon Choi, co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. You can find me at Brandon Choi ENT on X, and then Brandon Choi _ENT on Instagram. With that out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there, and see y'all soon. Later.